What we're going to talk about this morning is, and I've entitled the message, well, you already see it, so I don't even have to say it, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about from generation to generation. Have you ever double-checked or triple-checked to see your family line? How far does it go back? I know for sure that my line that I've actually seen goes back to the 1600s. The other day, I'm not sure who it was, but they had figured it out that they were back to 1200. I presume most of us here are somewhere in the 1900s to 1800s for sure. Okay? Maybe even further. Anybody back to 1700s? Okay? Anybody back to 1600s? Besides me. Oh, maybe we were neighbors. Well, let's go back further, maybe 1500s. Oh, then it's like, because one time I saw mine back to 1300, but I can't really prove that anymore. So, one of them. But anyway. Now, anyone back to Adam and Eve? All of us are, okay? Now, when we read the scriptures, we notice, especially in the Old Testament and a couple of places in the New Testament, it's very common to use the word begat. And here we notice, especially in the Old Testament, it's very normal, okay, in different books to have the lineage of different individuals. And we know that even this morning we sang a song that had Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And those three names, they pop up a lot. And they're always done together, usually. And that's significant because that refers really to the Jewish people or the Israeli people. And they are very particular, okay, about lineage. That's just part of their cultural tradition. And so that is interesting because they use it in different ways. And this morning I would like to talk a little bit about from generation to generation from a scriptural viewpoint. Now, we read 3 different passages that refer to lineage or to the generation from generation to generation. And from the one that we read, and I'll just read it again, and this is from Deuteronomy. And it says, Hear, O Israel, this is Deuteronomy chapter 7. And it says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. Now these commandments that I give to you are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up. And then tie them as symbols on your hands, and bind them on your foreheads, and write them on the doorframe of your houses and on your gates. And then it talks about, taking over the land. It's interesting how that is said. It says it's a land that is large, flourishing with large cities. Have you ever moved into a city where everything is ready for you to move into? I mean, a whole city, okay? And that's what the people of Israel did when they invaded the land. Now, the concern that the Lord has is, okay, once you're there and you've been satisfied and things are going okay and going well, be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. So that is a concern that the Lord has and had. Now, I'll go ahead and put the first slide on. That's not the first one, I believe. It should be, there we go. Okay. Now you can kind of see what that design is all about, okay? Now this design kind of brings together what I just read because of the different generations. And the word that is used, have you ever seen grain being piled up? Oh, some of us have, okay. You know, we won't call you what the farmers call you, okay? I won't say the word, but you know that when the grain is piled up, it makes an angle, okay, and it comes out to and there's a very large. It can be a very large base, and so cereals grain will do that, and this particular word refers to the bottom part of that pile, and uses that word to show all the interconnections and relationships that take place from generation to generation and kind of bring them all together. And so that's why I'm using, the pile of grain as an illustration. So what it says, and I'm just using these numbers arbitrarily, and it talks about the fathers and their children. And let's imagine that this father had at least 3 sons, and so they become three fathers. And then these 3 fathers, they also have 3 sons, and they also become 3 fathers. And then even their children, okay, declare unto them, okay, the glories of God and all the information that is important to pass on, and they become fathers. So you have a 4th generation family circle of, can you do the math? Did I do it correctly? Okay, 3 times 3 times 3 comes to, what do you know? It's 27. So now you have 27 families, or family units. And so this is how things work out when you think in terms of generation. Now, as we go to the next slide, we're going to talk about what needs to also take place. So what do these fathers and what do these families, what did the Lord expect of them? And the verb that is used here is very intentional. And it basically means that it's important to get to the point. It involves clarity and what are our goals. Do we have a path to guide us and direct us in terms of what we need to pass on? And the Lord and the Scriptures point to us what we need to do as a family. and what we need to pass on to the next generation. The information and what the Lord has said is already at our disposal. And of course, you know that children are inquisitive. When you say certain things, they ask a question. So be open to questions. Now, of course, when we ask our children to do something, sometimes what is their response? A question mark. It's called why. So we have an opportunity to explain why. Let's go to the next one. So where can we do this? As we do this, we need to provide answers that demonstrate truth. Take care. Do not use the opportunity to add something that is not relevant to what our children question. You know, sometimes our kids ask a question, and then all of a sudden we want to pile in a whole bunch of other information, as if, oh boy, I can say something now. So we need to be careful, because that's not what they're interested in. They're only interested in an answer to the question. And and you answered, and they just turned around and they're happy. It's okay. So let's continue our journey here as we teach or instruct our children in a home setting. This is what the scripture was encouraging us to do. So now the family home is of course a wonderful place. Sit together and to talk and to chat, and it creates a wonderful and proper atmosphere for interaction. Now there's one thing that we never got. We never got a college degree in how to parent our children. And how to administrate this responsibility does not always come easy. I presume that when we are a parent for the first time, we are going to be in for some surprises. And I know that was our case. I remember that Grace and I, when Christine was born, because she couldn't nurse, so we decided that, okay, one night I'll take care of feeding Christine, and then the next night you'll do that. Well, when it was my turn, I tried. Okay, I was actually able to feed Christine, but I had an issue. I couldn't stay awake. I went to sleep. So that went by the wayside. But each child, of course, presents a differentiated challenge, even though the scripture encourages us to do this. And so, as we journey along, we can also teach our children while we are taking a walk. It's a time to converse. It's a time to share knowledge and information. Outdoors gives us a wonderful opportunity, and we can connect and point to nature and who the Creator is. The scriptures are very clear that Jesus, or Jesus Christ, is the official Creator. Through him, all things came into being. He spoke the word, and it came into being. Now, I know that scientifically we can't prove all this, okay? Because sometimes science gets a little confusing. Now, I remember reading an excerpt on Stephen Hawkins, and he was dealing with the issue of, well, how did the universe come into being? And one opinion, okay, he gave, I'm not sure if he really believed it, but he said it came out of nothing. Now, what he meant by that, I'm not sure, but we know that when Jesus spoke the word, it came out of something that he knew, okay, because of the word that he used. So, walking on a trail, walking through the woods. And so this way we could connect, okay, this reality to scriptural reading, and can be a teaching moment because we know who the Creator is and who should receive the honor and receive the glory. Now, for some reason or other, we need some sleep. And we notice that even in this particular scriptural reading, that there's a time also just before you go to sleep. As the day ends, it's time to go to bed. And these few minutes can also be very important. There can be last-minute observations and last-minute questions. Sometimes our kids all of a sudden come up with questions, and part of the reason is they don't want to go to sleep. But that's okay. Let them have a little bit of challenge here, but it is a good time and opportune time. And then, of course, the start of a new day. That is also, it's wake-up time. Now, in our society today, all I remember is, okay, we get up, we got to get dressed, kind of get refreshed, and whatever is necessary, go to the bathroom, etc., etc. And of course, our parents were already involved, usually. I'm not sure how today's society goes, but anyway, we need to have something to eat, and we got to meet a time schedule depending on where we live. I know where I lived for a number of years, we had to get a school bus. Most of the time I had to walk to school, even up till grade 12. But that's okay. But you had to meet a schedule, and you had to get there on time. So, juggling, of course, work schedules, even today, if a husband and a wife are both working, depending. Now, I'm quite sure that when our children are young, somebody is at home. I hope so. And we know that the school bells are calling. So this is what happens, and this is what the scriptures encourage us to get involved in these particular moments. And you can see that they kind of start from early morning till evening. And so we need to take, shall we say, advantage of these kind of moments to pass on what the Lord is expecting us to do. Now, I know some of us do what we call devotions. And this is not just about devotions, what I'm talking about, because usually that is something that you do in a particular set time, and then you kind of say, oh, I'm not sure if you say I've done my duty, but anyway, we got to be careful. It's not just that aspect of it. There's more to it than that. And so it's very important that we get involved in a continuing process. Now, the next time, we also have information from Psalm chapter 78 that reinforces what I've just been talking about. So let me just read it, even though that Chuck has already read it. But, my people, hear my teaching and listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things from of old. So here we already know that the Lord is already speaking to us. He is wanting to say certain things to us. And so he is preparing here and says, hear my teaching. The Lord wants to be instructive. The Lord wants to help us to understand and to comprehend what he is saying and what he is teaching. He's not going to say something in a complicated way so that we can't really figure it out. But it will be something that he says that we can actually understand and comprehend and also practice. Now, these are things that we have heard and known, things our ancestors have told us. So they got this kind of information already from the Lord. The Lord has already passed it on. And so our ancestors, and it depends on who our ancestors are, because it's not that some of us in this day and age have no idea in terms of what is ancestral knowledge, which we can say is scriptural knowledge. They have no idea because their ancestors perhaps were not involved in this. We can't assume that just when we meet someone on the street, and if we want to talk with them, and then we say something that is scriptural knowledge, and the person looks at us and say, oh, where'd you get that from? Because they don't know. And maybe sometimes even we might say something from the scriptures that we're not aware of either. We don't know everything maybe to its details. But it says we are responsible in verse 4. We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. And so here we can see, okay, that the people of Israel had this wonderful opportunity. After coming from Egypt, there was enough, shall we say, miracles that took place even before they left from Egypt. We've all heard of the 10 plagues and how that was a direct intervention by the Lord. So the people of Israel had knowledge of these wonderful things that the Lord had provided. And then they came up to a situation, what we call the crossing of the Red Sea. Now they can talk about that experience. Now I'm going to say something that's going to maybe surprise you, okay? Anyway, when the Lord opened that passageway, and you can read this word, okay? In fact, if you want to read it right now, you can go into Psalm 78 and read either verse 8 or 9, okay? You'll find the word wall. The scriptures actually use that when the Lord opened the sea, there were walls, okay? Now, I'll be careful of what I'm going to say, because in some translations, in Exodus chapter 15, verse 8 or 9, it says that the waters were congealed. So I am assuming that the walls were made of ice. Okay? Now you'll say, now you're really getting far-fetched. So, anyway, the people of Israel had the opportunity to see this. And when the waters came back, also these walls of ice would have been broken up, and everything went back to normal. Now, I'm not sure if they saw any ice floating on the water, but I'm not going to go that far, okay? But these are experiences that the people of Israel, these were realities of what the Lord did for them. It says, His praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, His power and the wonders He has done. And of course, we could go on and on and on. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which He commanded our ancestors to teach their children. So this is our responsibility. Now, we have an issue here with our congregation. You see, most of us are beyond what we call children. Okay? Some of us are even great-grandparents. Some of us are grandparents. And some of us are, shall we say, parents. Okay? And so, what does that mean for us when we're talking about generation to generation? Well, we can easily, we're still involved with our children somehow or other. And we can also be involved with our grandkids. When was the last time you were with your grandkids? The ones, those of you that have grandchildren. And what did you talk about? What do they know about Grandpa? Do your grandchildren know that he's a follower of Jesus? These are things that they need to know. They might not necessarily agree, but I'm just, So we as parents have this obligation, or as grandparents, or as great-grandparents, whatever the situation is. So these are the opportunities and privileges. So the next generation would know them, and even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. So here we have 4 generations again. So I've talked about this is where the great-grandfather goes all the way to the great-grandchild in this particular setting. Now, why is this important? And as I mentioned about this pile of grain and how that whole pile is interconnected at the bottom. And that's what we're talking about in terms of interrelationships from generation to generation. They're connected, they're interconnected. And so, even in these 4 generations, they're knitted together. Now, I know today they can be interconnected from one continent to another, okay? Or from one country to another, and even from one city to another. And some of us perhaps have the privilege of having our grandchildren or our family members even living in the same city or locale that we are in. But the object here is, because of this interrelationship that is possible and is feasible, so that they would put their trust in God. That is the whole point when it comes to from generation to generation. And that you would not forget His deeds, but would keep His commands. Do you get the picture? It's not complicated. The only thing is, it's not easy always to do. Now, let's go to the New Testament. It's very interesting, this, as far as I know, is the only verse in the New Testament that has the same concept of generation to generation. And so Paul is speaking, now then, my son. It's interesting he uses the word son, because we know that son is a family relationship. When we talk about a son, we know that there's a father and there's a mother, there's a family relationship. And so Paul uses this term, my son, regarding Timothy. Now, we've all heard, and we're familiar with our son in the faith. And that's what Paul is using here. So be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses. So here, Paul is speaking, and Timothy is listening. So he's picking up this information that Paul is sharing, and now Timothy also becomes, shall we say, the possessor of that information. And then he's saying, entrust to reliable people. Now, Timothy now has to pass the same thing that he has learned through Paul to who? To reliable people. In other words, to people that begin to follow Christ or have already been following Christ. And then they will also be qualified to teach others. So here you have 4 generations of discipleship. This is basically how discipleship works. And I know in some of our experience in Brazil, this is what, at least, I focused our ministry on in Brazil, on this principle. That's very important that we make disciples, who in turn make disciples and just keep going. And it's very interesting when we've had the opportunity to see what has happened. When we look back and say, okay, roughly, it's over 50 years, So, because we last year we had what we called the 50th anniversary of the SIGA group, okay? And so when we look at that picture and look back, and we see the first followers from that time, and now we see second generation believers, and we also see third generation believers, because they have followed through with this reality, what Paul is saying in this particular verse. So, this is what it means, what one generation to another generation. That's the responsibility that we all have. And so, finalizing, and I can use the word finally now, brothers and sisters, whatever is true and whatever is noble and whatever is right and whatever is pure and whatever is lovely and whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, that's just in case you forget something. That should be added to that list. Let me read it again. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. So whatever you have learned, now this is Paul speaking it, or received, or heard from me, or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Now I'm going to take a little bit of license here and say, change it a little bit, okay? And we're going to be inclusive here. So whatever you have learned or received or heard from one another or seen in one another, put it into practice. Now we know that the previous verse already qualifies what others are hearing from you and what others are seeing in you, because of the first part of what verse 8 says. And the God of peace will be with you. And that is my message for today.